I guess it is now. I call the Lane County Budget Committee meeting of May 14th to order. We have all of the committee members present with the exception of Commissioner Bosevich. Yes, Dawn.
Excuse me, Herb, it's May 4th.
What did I say?
I think you said May 14th.
Oh,
just for the purposes of the record, I guess.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, it is May 4th.
And Chair, I don't see Commissioner Farr. Is Commissioner Farr joining us tonight?
He's on by
Farr on phone.
Oh, thank you.
I'm here.
Okay, so the first item for the meeting is committee business. First item for the committee business is elections of the fiscal year 2021-22 chair and vice chair. Are there nominations for committee chair?
Chair Vladimir, Pat Farr.
Yes, Pat.
I nominate Herb Vladimir chair.
Thank you, Pat. I'll accept that nomination. Are there any other nominations for chair? Yes, Ms. Lasley.
Actually, excuse me, I meant to second the nomination. I didn't know that wasn't required to be seconded.
Well, if I may, since we don't have a chair now, yes, I would say yes, it's required to be seconded.
Excellent.
And yes, today is May 4th.
So thank you, Don. We'll put you down for the second on the nomination for myself. Are there any other nominations for chair? Okay. Seeing no other nominations, I'd like to go ahead and do a vote for this. All those in favor of having myself as the chair for this ongoing year, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay, please. Okay, there we go. I'm your chair for this next year. Thank you very much. I will do my best. I do appreciate the challenge that's involved in doing these virtually, so I'll do my best. And then we'll open the floor to nominations for a vice chair, please.
Chair,
Yes.
I would like to nominate Don Leslie for vice chair.
Is there a second for Dawn?
I'll second.
Very good. Thank you. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of having Don Lasley as our vice chair, please signify by saying aye.
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 Oh, we have to raise our hands too? Aye.
Both. All those opposed, please raise your hand and say aye. Okay. Thank you, Dawn. Congratulations, you're our vice chair for this year.
Thank you, Chair Vladimir.
The next item on the agenda is the review of the minutes for the Budget Committee meeting. I have that right here. It was held on August 24th, 2020. Everybody should have had those in their packet. Are there any comments or corrections for the minutes for the August 24th minutes?
Chair Vladimir?
Yes.
I will abstain from voting on the minutes as I wasn't present for that meeting or on the board at the time, or on the budget committee at the time.
Okay, we can do that. Are there any other comments or updates for the minutes?
And Herb, I will say the same. This is Bruce Weber. I was not on the committee at that time either.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. And who was that? Chris, did you say that as well?
Right, yeah, it's me.
And that's three of us, three of them. Anybody else have any updates or corrections for the minutes? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as proposed.
I so move.
Thank you, Dawn. Is there a second? Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Since there's no other comments, let's just go ahead and vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, and all those opposed? Very good. Motion passes. Next item on the agenda, it says committee process. In there, we also have the review of the proposed bylaws. So I'd like to go ahead and move forward with the with review and discussion on the bylaws as we're presented in the packet with some updates. Christine, did you have any comments about this document before the committee discusses it?
Thank you, Chair Flodman. No comments other than we did highlight for you the changes. These were discussed during the orientation of the Budget Committee. And so in yellow, you will see the additions or changes that we made in response to those discussions. So just let us know if you have any other changes desired or comments. Thank you.
Okay, from the committee, any discussion topics on these proposed bylaws? Okay. Some of the items I think that we had discussion on previously and a little bit of back and forth on was the ability for people to abstain from voting. And those are the proposed language is there highlighted in yellow. Any additional comments before we move forward with voting on these about that topic or anything else on these? Okay, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
I'll move approval.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Buck, I got your motion to approve. Is there a second?
This is Bruce Weber. I'll second.
Thank you, Bruce. Okay. I'll ask one more time for any discussion. We discussed several things on this before, and it seems like the language is acceptable to everybody now, unless anybody wants to raise any more comments. Okay, we'll just go ahead and vote on this. All those in the favor of the bylaws as proposed in the packet and visible here on screen, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? I heard a cat. I don't think that counts. Okay, motion passes.
That was my cat, sorry.
And Christine, those now go to the board. Is that correct for their approval?
That is correct. Yes, we will get it on the next scheduled board meeting. It takes just a couple weeks to go through that process. So we'll let you know when that occurs and fill in that date and then post them on the Budget Committee website.
Excellent. And I think we'll just plan on moving forward with them as they're proposed and approved by us at this point. Okay, so for the committee process section, Christine, did you have anything else that was going to come up under that topic?
We do not have anything further for that topic tonight, no.
Okay. Does anybody else from the committee have anything else for committee process? Okay. Seeing none, I think we're ready to move forward to the budget message. Mr. Mokrowski.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. Good evening. Welcome to Chris Pryor and Bruce Weber, our new members of the committee. And it's great to be with you all this evening. I want to welcome those who are watching. We're usually in Harris Hall. I guess this is now the second year in a row that we've had a virtual budget process. But historically, we've been in Harris Hall, and I miss seeing everyone in person and being able to acknowledge folks, but welcome to our leaders and staff throughout the organization that are watching, as well as members of the public who are in attendance. I want to start tonight with a little bit of late breaking news. We just received a message from the governor's office that as of this Friday, the governor is moving the 15 counties that are in extreme risk to high risk. So I know that for our business community in particular, that is welcome news. I was asked earlier today, Chair Burney asked if we had heard a response to the letter that the Board of Commissioners sent last week to the governor requesting additional vaccines, and expedited processes. I said, no, we haven't heard anything, but now I think we've heard. We've had two messages from the governor. One has been a doubling of our vaccinations from last week to this week. We had 11,000 last week, 22,000 this week. And now we're moving back to high risk. So really appreciate, I know that's been a struggle for the governor and our state officials to weed through all of these challenges and try to find that balance between healthy economy and public health. So I want to start with that.
I'm sorry, if I may, this is huge. I just want to get this right. Are you saying that 1 week after we moved into extreme risk, now we for sure from the governor are moving down to high risk?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, as effective this Friday is what we're being told. So I wanted to share that at the risk of diverting our conversation. I don't think it's a diversion because these things are all interrelated. I also think that that news fairly articulates what we all have experienced here in our organization in the past year, really the past 14 months, which is responding on the fly to a lot of changing information and dynamics and ups and downs. And nobody asked for a global pandemic. No one asked for a major wildland fire, historic wildland fire in our community. And that really has been the theme of this proposed budget that we're presenting to you tonight. Is you may have heard this quote that Winston Churchill is credited with saying, "Never waste a good crisis." And we've talked a lot about in our organization in the last year. You know, we didn't ask for these crises. They are not good crises. But within every crisis, really, there are two elements. There are threats to be managed and opportunities to be seized. And so we've tried to look at our responsibility as an organization to respond to those threats, to manage those threats from the pandemic and from the wildfire and other challenges that we face. But also, let's make sure that we view this through an opportunity lens. There are always opportunities within these crises to do good, to advance the causes that are important to us. So that has been our focus in the past year, and it is the theme of our budget for the proposed budget. And I wanted to start with that message, and we'll try to articulate in a few ways how we have sought to capture the opportunity within these crises in the past year. I want to first start, as we always do, with a couple of slides you all, I'm sure, are very familiar with, but it's a good reminder just to ground ourselves in the long-standing challenges that we face in this organization. It's an old story that is still relevant today. Lane County historically relied on a significant amount of revenue from the federal government through logging on federal lands. And as that those federal policies and practices of logging on federal lands changed over the decades, the federal government put in place a entitlement program called Secure Rural Schools that guaranteed funding for historic timber counties. And then, as oftentimes happened, that revenue declined. You see this chart here that shows a 93% decline in those secure rural school payments, to Lane County specifically. But inflation adjusted about $20 million to the general fund and $20 million a year to the road fund. $40 million wiped off our books if you go back just a couple decades that we relied on. Around the same time in the mid-90s, property tax caps went into effect. So we always tell the story that Lane County has historically low and arguably artificially low property tax rate, permanent property tax rate at $1.28 per thousand valuation. Why is it so? Why do we have the 7th lowest property tax rate of any county in Oregon? Because why would local officials need to have a higher rate when we had all of this federal money, right? The times were good and we had all this federal revenue coming in, and we didn't need to tax our local residents for services provided here. But as that revenue declined and the property tax caps went into effect statewide, we were frozen in this place that we sit today, which is a really low permanent property tax rate, and yet an increasing demand for services by our community. So this is the revenue piece here that you see that decline. And then the next slide is the dollar graphic that we show to show the breakdown of every property tax dollar in Lane County. And oftentimes the confusing element is that everybody in Lane County, every property taxpayer in Lane County pays their taxes to Lane County. But if you look on your bill, only about 10%, 11% of your property tax bill goes to Lane County. The vast majority of property taxes throughout Lane County go to the school districts, to the cities, and then also to some special districts and fire districts. So Lane County keeps 11 cents out of every dollar, approximately out of every dollar in property taxes that are paid to us. We distribute the rest to those other entities. And so it's a really small share of the property taxes that our residents contribute. So that's what we have to work with as it relates to the discretionary funds that we invest in so many critical services, public safety and general government services. We'll talk, Christine will get into more the 33 funds that we have in our organization that separate all of these different resources. The vast majority of those are restricted funds where the revenue comes in and has to be used for a particular purpose. The general fund is really the one discretionary pot of resources that the Budget Committee and the Board of Commissioners can make a decision about how those resources are spent. And again, the challenge that we've historically faced is we have so few resources in the general fund with which to actually provide the really critical services that the community asks us to do. So that's our story. What I want to pivot to before talking about the proposed budget is to set the stage for this proposed budget. It's important to, I think, to be reminded of what our focus in the last several years has been. And that is to instill an element of fiscal discipline and create financial stability within the organization. We know that our revenues are constrained and we really can't control, other than asking taxpayers to pay more, we can't control the growth of revenue. We also know that we're underfunded. We continue to be underfunded in a number of critical service areas. And so reductions in our workforce is not the solution. We don't have a larger workforce than we need. We actually have a smaller workforce in a number of areas. If we had more resources, we would invest in higher levels of services in a number of areas. So our goal has been maintain what we have, maintain the service levels that we have, structurally balance our budget with the resources we have. Let's try to get our expenditures to the point that they keep pace with our revenues. If our revenues are growing 3% a year and our expenditures are growing 10, 15% a year, we have a structural imbalance. So our goal really has been to pull those two and create structural balance within all of our funds, and at the same time, build up our reserves. So of the last several years we've done this, we got to eliminate these structural imbalances, these deficits that we're operating on. We can't use our savings account, our reserves, to balance the budget. It's like using your personal savings account to pay your mortgage. Your savings is gone, you still have your mortgage. What do? It's no different with government. We can't use one-time revenues to pay for ongoing expenses. So that's been our goal. This is, I'll cut to the chase here for anyone that wants sort of the bottom line. The proposed budget is structurally balanced. The vast majority of our funds and all of our major operating funds are structurally balanced, including the general fund. The road fund is not structurally balanced. We have a few funds that are not structurally balanced. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. We had to use reserves in order to avoid reductions, but the general fund and other significant operating funds are structurally balanced. There are no layoffs. There are no reductions in services. That's the 5th year in a row that we've had that scenario in place, that we've been mostly structurally balanced, and we've maintained our service levels without reducing employment. We've also focused in the last several years on building up our reserves, as I mentioned. Our goal, the board has set a financial policy of maintaining at least 20% reserves in all of our funds. Some of our funds need to have higher reserves because the road fund, for example, or waste management, have significant infrastructure responsibilities, assets to maintain. So they need to have a higher reserve to be able to maintain those assets. But an operating department like the general fund, a 20% reserve is a really good goal and a best practice for governments. That's where we've been, at 20% or more reserves. We're not there in all of our funds right now because we've in the past year had to drain a number of our reserves in order to continue to deliver services without laying folks off at the same time that we've seen reduction in revenues. But the foundation on which we went into this pandemic and the wildfires and all the challenges we faced in the past year was critical in creating that scenario where we could actually commit to our employees and to our community that we were going to do everything we could to not lay anyone off, to not reduce services, because our community needs us now more than ever. Now is not the time to be reducing public services. Now is the time we need to be investing in additional needs in the community. So I just want to make that point that we didn't get here by chance. It wasn't just luck that we were able to sustain the past 14 months, because many other governments, including in this community, had to lay folks off, had to reduce services in order to balance their budget. We did not. And that was intentional. So I just want to stress that point because we took many years to get to that place, and it's an important place to be. We knew that there was going to be something that we didn't know a global pandemic was going to happen, but we did know that we would face challenges. And when we faced some of the biggest challenges in our lifetime, we were prepared to deal with that. So our ability then in the last year to seize opportunities within these crises was largely dependent upon the foundation that we had built, right? We had this foundation with which we walked into these crises, and we were able to not just manage the threats, but really say, how do we seize the opportunity? How do we go advance critical priorities that we may not have ever been able to do, if not for this challenge? So let me just walk through a few of those. We've talked a lot about vaccinations, and I have to check every day because, of course, the number changes. In the budget message, it says over 250,000 doses of COVID vaccine have been administered. It's now well over 300,000. So the number's old because it changes all the time, but it's a reflection of the incredible work that hundreds of volunteers and our dedicated public health staff and partners in the community have all done to get our community vaccinated. We now have around 60% of our adult population in Lane County have received at least one dose of vaccine. We know the 12 to 15-year-old population will be hopefully included in the Pfizer vaccine by next week. So that will continue to expand. But that effort has been monumental. And Lane County has been at the forefront of leading that effort. And I won't take the next 25 minutes or 30 minutes to talk about all of the things that and all the incredible work that our folks have done in our vaccination clinics. But there's been universal praise for that effort. And I just want to say that is a reflection, I think, the work that has happened there is a reflection of the quality of people we have in this organization and partners we have in the community, and the culture that we've built in this organization over the course of the last several years to create a sense of resiliency that, yes, we can stand up 6 mass vaccination clinics every week and vaccinate 20 to 30,000 people if we get the doses to do that. I'll just note that our vaccination rate in Lane County is among the highest in the state and continues to exceed the per capita vaccination rates in Clackamas, Marion, and Washington counties, which are comparable counties. A significant amount of state and federal funding that we have also received, over $40 million in assistance for renters at risk that we are in the process of getting out to renters in need. $4.5 million plus another $2.4 million that the governor, so approximately $7 million total that we have or will be distributing to the local businesses who have struggled throughout the pandemic. And we've done that in really, it's not just been throw the money out, it's really been targeted and strategic to make sure that the people that need those resources, historically disadvantaged businesses, rural businesses, and those who've been particularly affected by the pandemic receive those resources. And then facilities. We really have said, you know we need more shelter, we know we need more housing supports. And we've taken this opportunity in the past year to double down on those needs and make sure we're going out, utilizing state and federal dollars to achieve those opportunities. The Commons at MOK, which is a 51-unit permanent supportive housing facility, opened. This is for chronically homeless individuals in our community who are facing acute mental health and substance abuse and need significant services. They're also the ones that are cycling through our systems and costing our systems a lot. That facility is open and is now housing previously homeless individuals and connecting them to services and more permanent housing. We purchased in this less than a year ago, actually just over a year ago now, purchased the former VA clinic at 100 River Avenue. It's serving. We worked with FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers and our state partners to purchase that facility and retrofit it to be used currently as a recovery center from COVID-19 for unhoused individuals. Our plan is to convert that facility into a shelter and navigation center after COVID-19, and our intention is to do that within the next year. We also purchased the former Red Lion Hotel, which now has, I'm told as of today, approximately 96 individuals sheltered at the former Red Lion Hotel at 6th and Broadway. We participated in the Project Turnkey initiative, and our staff and partners in the community just did rapid work to acquire that facility, and we're now sheltering nearly 100 individuals, including 30 children with families, as well as providing service to fire evacuees. After those fire evacuees are permanently rehoused, our intention is to turn that facility into a permanent supportive housing operation similar to the Commons at MOK, along with our partners at Homes for Good and others in the community. The property at 13th and Tyler, which had long been discussed as an opportunity for permanent supportive housing for families. If you've driven by there recently, you'll see those buildings are now out of the ground. Construction is well underway on those 20 units of permanent supportive housing. We acquired the Four Corners property at Highway 99 in Roosevelt for a parole and probation office. We're not only going to use that as a facility, a much needed facility for our staff, but also to improve that block, that critical corridor to the Highway 99 in Roosevelt area. In partnership with sponsors, we'll be working on enhancing the reentry services and the great work that sponsors does there. So the list, of course, goes on and on. We've done many of these projects with our new lens of a community benefits framework that our board has strongly supported in making sure that we are investing in local labor and wages and benefits and disadvantaged and minority-owned businesses and energy efficiency in all of our projects. So this just gives you a sprinkling of some of the, was there a question? I just want to see. Ms. Leslie, I thought I saw someone's hand up, so, okay. A sprinkling of some of the things I just wanted to share, some of the examples of the great work that has happened despite these crises. And in addition to managing everything that comes with historic wildfire and a global pandemic, we're still advancing the organization and the community forward, catapulting our communities into the future, getting ourselves ready to come out of this pandemic and launch forward into a much brighter future. So let's talk a little bit about new investments in this proposed budget. I have long believed, and our team strongly believes, that just because you have a scarcity of resources doesn't mean you can't do anything, right? We can sit around and complain about what we lack, or we can focus on what we have and do the best we can with what we have. And that really has been our mentality in this organization, is let's not focus. Yes, there's a lot we don't have. Let's not focus on that, because we can't control all of that. There's a lot we do have. So let's focus on that and how we can best invest the limited resources we have in impacting the community significantly. So with the limited resources we have, there have been a lot of requests, a lot of needs in the community, a lot of needs in our organization. And I will share with you that while our budget is stable, it is stressed. We are stretched thin. We have identified every revenue that we're aware of. We are managing every expense as best as we can. We are stretching every dollar as far as we can. And so that's a good thing. It's also, I would say this is one of the more stressed budgets. I think I'd say it's the most stressed budget that we've had in the 7 years that I've been here. We're still doing more things, and we're still investing in new things, but there's a lot of needs out there, and so our dollars are really being stretched. So let me just share a few examples of this. Our continued investments in evidence-based practices, particularly in the public safety system, and I'm going to ask Tanya to pull up the third graphic. This will be the last one I'll show you, but this is also one that we've showed in the past, and this is my favorite. The other two are sort of depressing. But this one, it illustrates, and it's a little complex, but it illustrates how we view the public safety system in this organization and in this community. It is not it's not law enforcement over here and prosecution over here and supervision. You see all of those things. You see supervision and prosecution and corrections and patrol, but you see them in a loop. And in the middle, you see the critical mental health, community support services, housing, substance abuse, behavioral health services. The recognition that we have all of these public safety, criminal justice functions on the outside, right? That yes, are catching some of the challenges that we have. But ultimately, what we're trying to do in this community is connect people that interface with the patrol, with law enforcement patrol and the jail and prosecution and parole and probation supervision. We're trying to connect them to services to help them stabilize their lives and get on a solid footing to be able to end that cycle of recidivism, stop the cycle you see there at the end. This is what we're about. And so for several years, we have talked about this. Every year we make additional investments in that, in behavioral health, mental health, public safety. And so this year, we've identified the intersection of behavioral health, public safety, and the criminal justice system, particularly individuals who are unhoused, who are interfacing with all of those systems. They're interfacing with mental health services and substance abuse services. They're interfacing with public safety. They're interfacing with the courts, and they're often unhoused.
Can I ask you a really quick question? I'm sorry to interrupt. It just occurred to me from thinking from this morning session, that youth services are not part of this, part of the system as represented by this graph. Is that correct?
They should be.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just looking to see if they're reflected in community services or. So we'll have to check on that. Yeah, they should. They should be. If they're not specifically called out.
Youth and extension were part of jail or part of community services, or what, just where that lives.
Yeah, well, and youth services would live sort of in several different places, right? It would live in supervision, and it would live in corrections, and it would live in that mental health, because we sort of provide all of those types of services there.
Great,
so
thank you.
At least in your mind, if it's not reflected here in your mind, yes, youth services should live in those areas. So this graphic illustrates the intersection of all of these things. When we talk about public safety, we don't talk about law enforcement and mental health as separate things, but rather as interconnected. So the investments, we've added 4 additional positions in our behavioral health division.
Mr. Moga, just
Yes.
related to Commissioner Trieger's question, clearly prevention should yield dividends in the form of reduced costs in other parts of the public safety system. Noted that this graphic dates from, looks like FY 16-17. Just, very interested in hearing more either from you or from the department directors about how preventative programs from youth services to this kind of interconnectedness have affected budget expenses in things like jails and patrols. Jails in particular, very expensive, right? $100,000 per prisoner year, right, for the jail versus, maybe a few $1,000s or $10,000 for a lot of case management in a preventative mode. So are we seeing the dividends from these investments?
Yes, great question. And we'll talk about that in the course of the next week and a half as we work through the budget. One of the things that we have used to inform our decisions for investments in the areas that I'm talking about here in behavioral health is our FUSE program, the Frequent Utilizers of System Engagement, in which we've done a pilot program. We've identified those individuals that are cycling through the system and their cost on the system. And we're literally identifying those individuals and saying, what are the services we need to connect them to reduce those? So we have tracked data to a degree around the percentage impact and decrease on law enforcement arrests and jail intakes and emergency room visits and those types of things. So that really is the idea here with these positions: mental health specialists, peer support specialists, civil counsel, so some legal support. The board is well aware of some of the challenges that we faced with particular cases in our behavioral health operation. And so we're adding support, legal support, that will be actually embedded as part of the team with our behavioral health division to work further upstream on those types of challenges and be a part of advising and providing counsel to that behavioral health team. But the idea is to work with those individuals at the intersection of behavioral health, public safety, and criminal justice system who are unhoused to do proactive case management, same-day screening, assessment, and connections to services. That's the general concept. And separate but similar to that is the investment that we're making along with the sheriff in a transition to a more robust electronic surveillance program. The sheriff's goal is to double the number of in the course of the next year and grow from there the number of individuals on the electronic surveillance program. Currently, we have approximately 80 individuals who are on electronic surveillance, and the sheriff's goal is to grow that to 150. And then as technology expands, to continue to grow beyond that. But the idea here is individuals that are otherwise housed in a jail, when they're on the electronic surveillance program, they're able to maintain employment, housing, and community ties and are less likely to reoffend. So this is another good example of this is our county law enforcement operation that is coming forward with a request to say, please expand this program, because these are individuals that we're serving. There are individuals that we're serving in the jail, that we're housing in the jail, that should not be in the jail. They're better suited to be on community supervision via an electronic surveillance program. The jail is for certain individuals that need to be in a secure correction facility, but many of these folks do not. And without any additional investment, we're not able to do that. So credit to the sheriff and our public safety partners on that effort. You'll hear more about these from the sheriff, but these gaps were identified, and particularly the gaps in behavioral health were identified. We typically rely on grants to fund these types of programs. And because we have such scarce resources in the general fund, we have not been able to provide the investment in these types of services. I will say that in behavioral health, it is this is the most significant general fund investment that we're making in behavioral health in an ongoing way in at least a decade. So it's really a significant, critical investment of general fund resources in that body of work. I mentioned the shelter, and again, we continue to invest. We identified funds last year and included funding for ongoing operations of a shelter and navigation center. We've not opened that yet. Those funds have been repurposed this year to support the very unique non-congregate shelter dynamics that we have in our community because of COVID right now. But that funding continues to be available for our shelter and navigation center in the future. A couple of other additional investments that we're making. Equity, access, and inclusion have been critical for us in the last several years. We really had very little in the way of our equity investments. We've done a lot in terms of adding a staff person to support that work, creating a panel of volunteers from the community who participate in advising us on matters of equity and access. We've done great work in developing an equity lens that we're working on implementing. But we also know that we have very little bandwidth with just one staff person that's dedicated to that work. And so we've added a management level position in equity. And the idea here, this was a request from the Equity and Access Advisory Board and other partners in the community who made a request for that investment. I agree, and our leadership team agrees that investment is critical. And the intent is for that role to provide strategic leadership, enhance focus, clarity, and to drive results in our equity work. Another exciting investment that we're making in the proposed budget is in data analytics. While we weren't able to do all of the investment that we would have liked to, because we just don't have the resources to invest in everything we'd like to get to where we want to with data analytics, we have seen through these crises, both through the pandemic and the Holiday Farm fire, that these crises have really catalyzed the need to consume relevant real-time data to respond to our community's needs. When you look at the response work that happened immediately and in the months since the Holiday Farm fire, when you look at the data that we rely on a daily basis to track COVID-19 and the pandemic and make decisions about how to allocate resources and respond to changing needs, data is so critical. And it's not just critical for all of us here that are at higher level decision-making places, but it's critical for every employee at the front lines of providing service. And our goal is ultimately to get to the place where every employee has ready access to relevant data with which to make critical decisions in the moment to solve challenges that they're facing. And we have some great examples of that we'll share with you in our committee meetings. But we're very excited to add 2 positions to provide data leadership, development, literacy, and innovation. And another smaller but really important investment is our Failing Forward initiative. And Lane County will be one of 5 counties nationally that is participating along with the Center for Public Impact and the National Association of County Administrators to do a 12-month cohort where we'll identify 3 departments and various teams to participate in this year-long program that will begin this summer to build and implement action plans with the goal of creating an organizational culture that promotes innovation, responsible risk-taking, and experimentation and learning from failure. So it's not about promoting failure, it's about really learning. And that's what we're trying to do here in Lane County is empower our employees at every level of the organization to be leaders, to make decisions at whatever level they're at, and to give them the tools and resources necessary to do that. Additional investments we'll talk about in youth services, facilities maintenance, and our community health centers. But I want to pivot now and begin to wrap to allow for your questions and public comment, and close here by talking a little bit about workforce culture. This is really important, and I hope that you'll take this for how I intended, which is not just a nice showing of some good information and data, but really, to me, what's so relevant about recruitment, retention, development, and creating this healthy workforce culture where people thrive in their jobs is ultimately the quality of delivery service to the community, right? The healthier our workforce is, the place to work is, and the higher level of talent and expertise we're able to recruit and retain and develop in our organization, the greater the challenges we can meet and the higher level of services we can provide to the community. We've worked hard over the past several years and been very intentional in our efforts to listen, engage, and support our employees. I think the last year has been the hallmark of that work, in addition to not only not laying anybody off in the middle of all of these crises. We've made significant investments in flexibility for our employees and trying to meet employees where they're at, depending on what their challenges that they may face, that every employee is unique and has different challenges, and let's try to be as supportive and accommodating as possible. We continue our critical investments in health and wellness, the significant work we've done, not only to stabilize and lower our costs for healthcare for employees, but really to enhance health and wellness of our employees. Our efforts around recruitment, retention, and development, not only bringing our wages up to be more competitive with market so that we can recruit and retain, but also investing in things like our Emerging Leaders Program and our diversity internships and opportunities to make sure that if you want to have, we want you to come to Lane County and find a career here and start at one place, and the sky's the limit. If you have talent and ability and desire and motivation, you can go as far as your heart and your mind will take you. And I just want to share with you a little bit. We did recently an employee satisfaction survey. It's a nationally benchmarked survey. We do it every 2 years. So 2021 was up again. We did it in 2019. We've done it every 2 years prior to that. And a few findings. First of all, we've had on average about 50% of employees have responded in the past. We're really pleased with the participation that we had there. Some really critical things. 85% of Lane County employees said that the mission and vision of the county makes them feel their job is important. That was a 10% increase from just 2 years ago. That's a big swing, and that exceeds the national average. These are very preliminary results. I haven't seen all of the data, but our consultants and team in HR provided me just with some of the high level pieces. There's significant praise for supervisor interactions. This also exceeded the national average, but over 80% of employees said that they were very or moderately confident in the leadership of their supervisor. About 8 in 10 felt their supervisor does an excellent or good job encouraging employees to use their own judgment to get the job done. 7 in 10 employees gave positive marks to timely communication, welcoming employee involvement, encouraging innovative solutions, among others. Many of the ratings we saw increased from 18 to 32%. That's a huge 18 to 32%. And those included communicating information in a timely manner, coaching or mentoring, encouraging employees to come up with innovative solutions, recognizing high-performing employees, managing low-performing employees, applying discipline fairly and consistently. So that to me is really important. And then it reflects, if you look at our turnover rate has been on average 12, 13% for the past 6 years or so. We had an up year, it was about 15%, was our high year in 2017. We had a big strike of our largest union in 2017. Since then, you've seen a steady decline. And in 2020, our turnover rate was 8.5%. Now, you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics nationally for 2020, and the turnover rate for state and local governments, when you take education out, was 21%. So in 2020, and across all industries, it was 57% turnover. And that was a 12% increase from 2000. So the conventional wisdom was 2020, oh, everyone was staying put in their job. Well, that wasn't true nationally. State and local governments were up 2% and at 21% turnover. And all industries were up from 45% to 57%. Yet Lane County went down 3% from 11.6 to 8.5%. So I think that those are things we find important because the quality of our workplace and the quality of talent that we can recruit and retain and develop directly impacts the quality of service we provide to the community. So I'll just conclude here by saying that really the hallmarks, the most critical aspects of our success, I believe, in the past several years have been very simple. Not easy to do, but simple. And they've been two things: strategic focus and financial discipline. Those two things, being focused on the things that are most important to our community, our policymakers who represent our community, that strategic focus, and then the financial discipline to make sure that anything we're going to take on, we have to be able to pay for. We have to manage our expenses and our revenues effectively. Make sure we have reserves so we can deal with the challenges that face us. And, you know, my dad always said, keep it simple, stupid. And so I don't think the formula is really hard here. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel every year. There is a different theme this year around capturing opportunity. But that strategic focus and that financial discipline remain. And that will be my commitment as long as I'm here. And I encourage all of us to continue with that frame of mind. So thank you for your attention. Look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Morkowski. Questions from the committee? Steve, I'm not hearing any or seeing any, so thank you very much.
I just want to make a comment more than a question, because I can ask Steve questions another time, but I'm especially excited about the new equity position, not only that we're adding an FTE, so we're doubling our capacity there, but that it's a manager level position, I think is also really important in terms of how it's going to inform and be part of the organization. As I often talk about our equity work, it needs to both be a container that holds everything we do, but also a through line that's embedded in all of the work. So I'm really excited and looking forward to being able to support a budget that includes that increased capacity in that really important area.
Chairman?
Excellent. Mr. Hazen.
Yeah, so I'm really impressed with the talent management accomplishments that Mr. Mokohajski reported there, and recognize the very significant budget consequences of keeping our turnover rate down and keeping employee satisfaction up. So kudos to the leadership of the county and that achievement. That is no small feat. One just kind of process question I have while we're in this session. There were some written comments received regarding data from the district attorneys and sheriff's office, and with the equity manager in place, with the data analysts, sort of new department coming on, who owns the response? I'm just curious from Mr. Mokohajski's perspective, who owns the response to that kind of request? Because it seems to me it could be any number of those organizations, or perhaps one that I didn't mention. So just curious what your perspective on that is.
Chair and Member Hazen, and I don't know the specific request. We probably would want to narrow down specifically on what data point you're looking for. From what I have seen from the some of the communication that I have seen from earlier today, I believe at least the district attorney's office and the district attorney and Patty Pearl, I believe, is here and has seen some of that information. So I believe the district attorney is one potential source of information. Sheriff's office may be another, but I think if we can refine down what specifically the question or request is, then we can direct it to the appropriate folks.
Commissioner Bernie.
I just want to publicly acknowledge and agree with everything that Steve just said. It's been a hell of a year. It's been an honor and a burden to serve as chair of the board during this tough year. I didn't start doing that, Commissioner, then Chair Buck started doing that. She has the honor of, since we last met, also dealing with one of the worst natural disasters in this county's history. It's been a hell of a year. And Steve, I just want to say that you started this out with maybe what to commissioners is more earth shaking than to the rest of this budget committee. But the fact, kudos on everyone involved. The fact that the governor did rethink risk levels, the fact that we now aren't moving into a more partisan and finger pointing environment, and the fact that Lane County was able to double vaccinations received this week in no, I mean, you know, I was in there pitching with you, but in no small part due to the fact that we have the capacity to receive and deploy them. So kudos, and I just wanted to say that in front of all committee members. And if I may, in this environment, to provide the opportunity for staff to thrive, as Mr. Mokraheisky, Mr. Rickoff, and leadership have done. I mean, I've watched it firsthand as it relates to this whole notion of creating a thing called a community benefits bidding protocol with huge implications, reversing the whole notion of the race to the bottom. And now that gaining traction is huge. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as we embark upon some of the details of this proposed budget. Thank you, Chair.
Other comments or questions for Mr. Mokraheisky? Okay, thank you, Steve. Okay, next we're moving on to the budget overview. Ms. Moody.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair Blodman, committee. So I'm here to give some financial overview for you of the budget. You'll hear details from your departments over the next week and a half, of course, but to give you some context to start off our process. So starting first with just the total amount of the proposed budget in front of you, 767.7 million. That is a decrease from the current year budget. I'll explain a little more detail why, but a big piece of that decrease is the money that's been received into the county in the current year for the COVID funds through the state. And so that inflated the budget in 2021 and then 21-22 going back down to a similar size before that those funds came in. So we do have 33 funds countywide. The pie graph here, not meant for you to be able to read all the names, but more to give you just kind of a context. This chart is in your document as well if you wanted to see all the different fund names, and all of those descriptions are also in your document. But just to give you an idea of the vast spread of types of funds that we have, let's go to the next slide, which will show you by fund type. So there are different fund types defined in budget law. The general fund you've heard mentioned this evening, and I'll have some sections, some slides on just the general fund here at the end of the presentation. But special revenue fund is the one that I'll point out to you. The second one listed there is our largest type of fund. So special revenue funds being restricted funds that are received in for specific purposes. The levy fund is an example there. Our health and human service fund is the largest special revenue fund that the county has. And I'll go over kind of the changes that are occurring and why you're seeing these decreases in each type. So in the general fund, the decrease is related more to one-time expenses that happened in 2021, in particular some capital projects. So as we spent down funds there, you see the fund decreasing year to year. Special revenue fund received a lot of those COVID funds that I mentioned, or funds that passed through the county for things like rent relief out into the community. So that fund received quite a bit of that in 2021. Our debt service fund, we have debt service funds to receive transfers from departments to pay for any debt service related to our capital assets. The decrease happening year over year there is related to the payoff of the customer service center bond occurring in 2021. That was the last piece of some pay down of debt that we did a few years ago, where we set funds aside in order to pay those debts as soon as they were callable. Capital fund, those capital projects that I mentioned, some of it coming out of the general fund occurring in 2021 are decreasing slightly in the 21-22 budget as projects are completed. So that's that decrease happening there. Our enterprise funds, that's some of our fee revenue decreasing. and reserves being spent year over year. Internal services, the big decrease there is related to the PERS side account that Steve Mokohysky mentioned. We had used some one-time funds to create a PERS side account to help manage our PERS debt going forward. And then finally, the Fiduciary Fund. We have one legacy benefit that we've reserved for entitled Retiree Medical that's provided to employees who had met certain conditions, and that will gradually continue to decrease in size as those employees receive that benefit and move off that plan. So one thing I want to highlight too was mentioned briefly is the amount of discretionary funds that are inside the budget. So a very large budget of $767 million, but the amount of discretionary funds are in the general fund. And then what we refer to as discretionary funds are those funds like property tax, timber revenue that are received by the county and not dependent on a department providing a service. And that amount that's discretionary is $90.2 million. So that's 11.75% of the entire budget. And so that is why you'll hear us focus most on the general fund and talk about the service option sheets and some other things that we'll cover this evening. Next slide. The full-time equivalent positions that the proposed budget has is 1,804. And I've shown you here by service category. And then on a few of these slides, you'll note that I've put where you can find additional information in your budget document. And so page numbers there. Go ahead for the next slide. So especially for our newer committee members, a few things that you can refer back to here, but some budget basic type of language that we'll have, you'll hear us use throughout the process. Things like revenue versus resources. So revenue is items like property tax revenue, money that's received from funding sources and services provided are fines and fees, money that's received each year, many times ongoing revenue. And then we have resources like our fund balance that we carry forward from year to year and transfers that we receive from other funds. So there is a difference. Revenue is part of resources, but there's pieces of the resources that might not be ongoing revenue. And then we have the requirements and expenditures side. So the expenditures are defined as personnel expenses, material and services, capital, and debt service. But in addition to those, we have requirements that we have each year, including things like transfers to the other funds, contingencies and reserves that we need to hold, and in some cases, an unappropriated ending fund balance. Next slide. Here's some of the terms that I won't read through here, but you can refer to them that define things like appropriation, what is material and services contingency. And then just highlighting back to where we mentioned we have 33 funds. The reason that's important is the fund is actually the top level of each budget. And so each fund has to balance on its own. So 33 different bottom lines is one way to look at it. That then make up the entire county budget. Within a fund, you'll have organizational units in many cases. That's a department for our language in the county. We could have things that are non-departmental. So there's a section in your budget document that's non-departmental that highlights a few things that just don't fit within a department's service categories, but are more of a county-wide, but they would be within a fund. And then finally, you get down to the object classification, the personnel, the material and services, where we really do budget down to a specific line item. And you can see some of that detail in the back of every department section. It will show you the line items in their budget. And then in the appendix, you can also see all county funds rolled together, every line item in the county budget, and then the general fund in the same way. And then here's the breakdown, just going back to the expenditures requirements on those line items and where you'll find certain things, either within a department budget. The department budgets contain the personnel, the material and services, and the capital associated with their budgets. There's other things like the debt service, transfers, and contingency that you'll find within the fund budget, that non-departmental section. Next slide. So then talking about whether a budget is balanced or structurally balanced, or both, hopefully. So balanced budget is required by law for counties. Our resources have to equal our requirements. We cannot run a deficit year to year. We do have to balance. But here at Lane County, we've taken it a step further to focus on the structural balance of our funds. And what we mean by that is that the ongoing expenses have enough ongoing revenue to cover them. So the comment that was made about using your savings account to pay your mortgage, we don't want to end up in a situation where we're using one-time money that will eventually run out to pay for expenses that won't stop. So that's what we're talking about when we're looking at the structural balance of our funds. A couple detail slides here for you, just at a higher level to show you the comparison year to year. This is the revenue in the entire county budget, and it's sorted here by size for you in the 21-22 budget. So state revenue being the largest source of funding, followed by internal fees and charges. The internal fees and charges is one of those areas where a department is receiving funds into their budget. They're then being charged an internal fee. Like an example is when we pay health insurance, a department will pay that into an internal service fund, and then we pay an insurer. That's one area where when you look at the operating budget of the county and how many actual dollars pass through the budget, this is a place where these internal fees are actually showing up in the budget twice. First in the department budget, second in the internal service fund. And in the appendix of your document, you'll find an operating budget detail sheet for you that shows you those items that would be appearing in internal fees and charges as well. So taxes and assessments is actually our third revenue source, countywide, staying fairly consistent year to year. Federal revenue decreasing in 21-22 as compared to the current year. Some of that is the Secure Rural Schools payment that was received in 2021 that is not renewed for 21-22. And then some other pass-through funds that were related to COVID and the CARES Act. And then followed by external fees and charges, some administrative charges, and some smaller revenue sources there for you. So next slide. The other resources, just to show you how the fund balance is changing year over year. This is the fund balance for every fund, so all 33 of those funds, decreasing from 2021 to 21-22. Transfers also decreasing. The transfers decreasing were the result of some one-time transfers occurring in 2021. Things like capital projects. There was a transfer in Health and Human Services into their behavioral health from their Lane Care Fund. Things that were highlighted in the document for you last year that were one-time. There's also intra-fund transfers. That's when a fund is transferring within itself. That occurs in some funds as divisions and departments would be paying for their own internal services. And there is one inter-fund loan appearing in the budget for 21-22. It is currently what we would probably call a placeholder. It's in the Parks Fund, requesting a inter-fund loan from the general fund. And that's because of the impacts of COVID on that fund. But the hope is that the art funding that we'll discuss a little bit more will make up that shortage. And so in order to balance the budget, we needed to put that in because those decisions haven't been made about the funds yet. But the hope is that that will go away. So some page numbers there for you on where to see more information about fund balance and transfers. On the expenditure side, you'll see material and services year over year, the blue line being 21-22 being down from current year, again, related to different projects and one-time expenses that occurred in the current year. And personnel services staying relatively flat. There is a vacancy variance budgeted, again, countywide, each fund determining what They should be budgeting in order to arrive at what they actually think they will spend on personnel rather than budgeting for 100% employment. So we take that into account at the beginning of the budget process to make sure we're not overinflating our personnel budget. So those are included there. Capital, as I mentioned, more capital projects happening in the current year as opposed to next year. And so that's why you see that decrease there. And the debt being that payoff of the customer service center. Next slide. The other side of the requirements, in the same way you see the same transfers happening on the expense side that just showed on the revenue side, intra-fund transfers, the contingencies countywide decreasing, as well as the reserves. Many places that is the result of the impacts of COVID that were mentioned by the county administrator and needing to use reserves to keep services stable. Next slide. So this chart is actually also in your budget document. So I realize it's pretty small here to see, but just to touch on the need for reserves, as has been mentioned, they've been very critical to us in the last year and a half, dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. But in general, you always need to have reserves for things like cash flow. A good example is the general fund receives property tax payments in November, December, but our fiscal year starts in July. So we need to have cash on hand to be able to pay those expenses as they come in. It also impacts our bond rating, which is like a personal credit rating. And so the credit agencies will look at what our reserve levels are in specific funds and adjust our bond rating accordingly. And then we save for future equipment needs, future capital projects. So saving up over time, so building up reserves in order to meet those so that you don't have an expense hit in 1 year. And then we also use them for the things that we've used over the last year and a half, stabilizer for services. So when we have economy or revenue fluctuations, or we need to have funds on hand to protect our assets in the event of natural disasters, those reserves are available to us for those reasons. So the chart that you see here does detail each fund, the reserve level in the current budget, the proposed budget, and then some description about what the reserves can be used for. As you might imagine, the funds that are restricted also have restrictions on any reserves that are sitting within those funds. They have to be used for the same purposes. So explaining what those restrictions are on that chart there. Next slide. So as we're all aware, major events that have impacted the budget in the last year, the COVID-19 global pandemic continuing, we've had increased expenses, decreased revenue, administering funds that we did receive through the state to help with some of our expenditures in the CARES Act funding. Departments have worked through the limited public contact, even as they continue to provide services to the best of their ability. Places like assessment and taxation, the community health centers, our customer service center remaining closed for the bulk of the last year and a half. There were adjustments within the jail, public safety corrections. The Holiday Farm fire in September of 2020 required multiple agency response. The county on the budget side is responsible for providing reimbursement, kind of being the pass-through for those other agencies as we work with FEMA to receive reimbursements. And then the housing and assisting of homeowners. Next slide. So here's just a few highlights of the different ways that the budget has been impacted. You know, the increased expenses I mentioned, the funds that have been mentioned that have been hit, you know, multiple funds, but the ones that are larger are the road fund, the parks fund, the land events center fund, the community health center fund, all seeing decreasing revenue and needing to use reserves to continue operations. There have been staff added to provide services to the public in a few areas, things around the pandemic, of course, the vaccine clinics, the contact tracing, also staff to help with the fire recovery, inland management, other places there. And then has been mentioned the loss of structural balance in several of our funds because of the lost revenue and the need to use reserves. Next slide. So I've already mentioned the CARES Act. That was the first federal relief act that was signed in March of 2020. provided stimulus payments, of course, to the public, but also did provide money to governments, local governments, just to help with the expense side of things. There was some other funds that passed through Lane County, things like the rent relief, there were business loans and grants, and deferral of things like mortgage payments, student loans. About $20 million over the 2 fiscal years beginning 1920 and also 2021 was received by Lane County. Then to touch on, the next one is the American Rescue Plan, which is our most recent one. The county has not received funds from that one yet, but we do expect a direct payment. There's direct payments to states, counties, cities. There's infrastructure funds available within it. There's also a piece that is meant to be a type of secure rural schools replacement that we're still learning about. So one thing to note for you as a budget committee is the American Rescue Plan funds are not part of the proposed budget in front of you. That's because we're still waiting on Treasury guidance. There are restricted allowable uses for what we can spend the funds on. And the county is working on developing some guiding principles on how we can best use those funds for the intended purposes. So the next slide will show you that Lane County does expect a direct payment over the next 2 years for a total of $74 million. As I mentioned, it has some specific allowable uses. It can be spent through December 31st of 2024. So it's meant to be a longer term funding. There are some audit and reporting requirements. A big thing that we will stress is that these are one-time funds. They will not continue after these 2 payments that we'll receive. So staying focused on one-time expenditures, and also meant to help address the unknown impacts of what we don't know today as we recover from the pandemic. So a chance for local governments to recover from the pandemic and also hopefully create more future stability so that we're in a better position going forward as well. So on the general fund, just a few slides here for you on this. As I mentioned, this is the main operating fund of the county. It contains the most discretionary general funds that we have. It also provides critical services such as public safety, public health, assessment and taxation, elections, animal services, and then our internal services such as finance, facilities, county administration, county council are also all housed within the general fund. The general fund pays for about 30 to 35%, depending on the year, for the county's FTE. So going back to that pie that I showed at the beginning of the presentation, pulling out the slice of the pie here, that's the general fund, gives you an idea of the size of it compared to the rest of the budget. 125 million, it is a slight decrease from the current year. And there is an increase of 5.5 FTE to bring it up to 440 FTE in 21-22. And I've highlighted a few places for you. There is a section in your document that specifically talks about just the general fund. There's a balancing options section in your financial summary section that highlights some of the changes in addition to what's found in the budget message, highlights things that were added in the budget. And then the service option sheets, which you have in your binder as budget committee members, and the public can find on our website at lanecounty.org/budget, looking for the 21-22 budget process. And the service option sheets detail every general fund dollar that's being spent in the budget, describe the service being presented or provided and the FTE, and some general executive highlights for you, as well as any leverage details. So by that, we mean any general fund money that we spend, do we then receive other funds? So here's the split of the discretionary versus the department activity. This is in the document, so I'll go on to the next slide. This is also found in your budget document. This splits the discretionary general fund out by service category. So tracking how much are we spending on public safety versus public health versus general government. Next slide. Here are the resources, comparison by type, comparing year over year. For the most part, staying fairly steady. One thing I will highlight for you is property tax growth is projected at 0% growth between current year and 21-22. There are expected appeals, so our assessor has recommended we hold that flat. And then the fund balance changing because of the spending of one-time projects that I've mentioned already. The requirement side as well, the personnel services, material and services growth that we try and hold to about CPI, what's projected by the Oregon Economic Forecast. And reserves decreasing slightly because of the one-time projects, but we continue to maintain at least a 20% reserve with some additional future capital planning reserve. And the general fund forecast looking forward remains about where it was last year at this time. We still continue to need to watch our expenditure growth to make sure that it doesn't outpace revenue. And so there is a slight, depending on what the property tax, especially revenue does, we'll be watching that growth to make sure that we remain structurally balanced going forward. And just a couple more slides here. I know I'm running out of time, but future cautions for us is still things around like PERS rate increases. This is information that the budget committees received before, but there are projected PERS rate costs going up over the next several biennium. Community and service needs increasing in a variety of areas. We know places like housing and mental health and fire recovery need additional investments. And then really watching the structural balance of the fund as we have temptation to spend, if we receive one-time money, making sure we spend it on one-time expenditures so that we don't create a gap for ourselves in the future. Next slide. Still looking at our aging capital assets as well. This is a comment from a performance auditor report back in 2016, but anywhere where we can use those one-time funds for places like capital expenses that would help with the aging of the assets would be a good investment going forward. And so pointing also the budget committee to our draft CIP, which is out there on our website. And you can see the projects that are part of that 5-year CIP. That document goes to the Board of Commissioners, went to the Board of Commissioners in January, will go again as a final in July. And so that gives you an idea of the places where things are needed. And this just highlights the foundational strengths of the organization, the strategic plan, the strategic priorities and key strategic initiatives, the strong financial policies and bond rating, the things that really did help us through this past year, being structurally balanced, making sure that we had reserves in the case of an emergency, and the people and partnerships staying deeply committed to delivering services to the community. And that is the end of my presentation. Let me know if you have questions.
Thank you, Ms. Moody. Any questions, Commissioner Farr?
Thank you, Chair Bloodman, and congratulations on your election. Ms. Moody, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I've been watching these presentations for a long time, and every year it seems more solid. In fact, what is particularly impressive is this year, after Board Chair Bernie had said this was a pretty terrible year in terms of the many things that we had to face, the fact that we are maintaining a structurally balanced budget is a pretty amazing act, and it took a lot of work to get us to that point. And the budget that we maintain these days, Chair Bloodman, you're the only other member here in this room who was here when it wasn't so balanced. And you remember that these meetings seemed a lot more like going to the dentist without Novocaine than it seems today. And really, it really is pleasurable, even though we do have challenges ahead of us. And Ms. Moody, you've been around for longer than I have. This is only my 9th budget with the county. Councillor Pryor, Chris, you've been around for a lot of budgets with the City of Eugene, with 4J, and now with Lane County. So you know that it's not always pleasant hearing some of the numbers, and you're wondering where you're going to cut and how you're going to cut it. For us to be in a position today where that really isn't one of the things on the plate, where we can actually move forward on a regular basis. It really is a pretty comforting position to be in. I have a question though, Ms. Moody. You talked about our bond rating predicating our interest rates, et cetera. And I have a question for Mr. Mokrahysky. Could you, Mr. Mokrahysky, tell us what our bond rating is today and what it was when you first arrived, when the Board of County Commissioners hired you 7 years ago? And can you also tell us when the last time our bond rating was upgraded?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Commissioner Farr. I believe prior to 2017, we had a AA3 rating by Moody's, which is, it's sort of on their scale is rated AAA is the highest you can get. Very few organizations have AAA. Then it goes AA1, AA2, AA3, and then it goes into the, I think, AA and then Bs and Cs. So it sort of goes down. So being in the AA category is a good thing. We were AA3 in early 2017. Moody's reviewed our credit rating as part of a I think it was a $9.5 million refinancing, and they upgraded our general obligation limited tax rating to AA2, and then in 2019 they reviewed the county again, a general rating, and upgraded our rating to AA1. So we're at AA1 now. We were AA3 prior to 2017, AA1 at this point. So we only have one notch higher to go here, very difficult notch to achieve. But maintaining this position, I would say, is at the very least what our goal is at this point. At the time in 2019, Moody's noted, I think, strong credit characteristics, low debt, strong finances, prudent management, growth in reserves. Those were some of the themes that I think we've heard us talk about here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mokrahysky. The numbers I've asked you to say the historical facts several times, and really that is one of the things that helps us to enjoy the stability that we actually have today. It's not something that happened in the last 1, 2, or 3 years. It's something that began really, I can point to about the time we hired you, Mr. Mokrahysky. You surrounded yourself with an excellent staff who pays close attention to. Ms. Moody, one thing that you talked about, and that is debt reduction, reducing our debt. You talked about paying off the customer service building bond and how that has significantly affected our ability to maintain our current bond rating, and also maintaining the reserves, not paying our mortgage with our savings, as you've stated. So I want to thank you for the stability once again that we all enjoy, and it allows us to look at little pieces here and there in the budget and how can we adjust them, as opposed to how do we weather the onslaught of budget cuts and layoffs and firings and position eliminations that we have all experienced in the past, or many of them experienced in the past. So thanks for getting us in that position, and we can have what is going to be a very healthy budget discussion as to how we can look to the future and how we can make this place a better place for all 370,000 people who live here. The last thing I'd like to say is that I know that the two separate elected officials are here with us. That's Sheriff Harold and DA Perlow. I'm glad that you're here with us. I remind everybody that each one of you received more votes in your last elections than all commissioners and Eugene City Councils combined in each of those two elections. So that's a pretty heady thing that that many people support you in your positions. I support you also. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Other questions for Ms. Moody? Yes, Commissioner Traeger.
Thank you. Really quickly, just clarify for me the ARPA dollars, the 74 million. Will we just address those through the supplemental budget process since they're not part of this budget?
Correct. Well, in the current year, if we need to put any in the supplemental, we do. I'll back up. We expect receipt here within 60 days of enactment, which was March 11th. And so today, actually, at the board meeting, they created a new special revenue fund to receive those funds into. But as mentioned, we have no plans at this time yet until we have the Treasury guidance on spending them. So I do expect probably before we adopt, we'll at least put into the 21-22 budget the fund balance to carry forward into next year. But correct, it will be supplemental, and once the board makes further decisions on those spending, that will add it to the budget.
Great, thank you.
Other questions, Commissioner Burney?
Thank you, Chair. Christine, by the way, just looking at the screen, Commissioner Farr, I don't think Christine's been around longer than you have. Just being silly. Christine, did I hear you say that you did not expect an increase in aggregate property tax receipts?
Correct. Yes, and that's based on the assessor. He really is anticipating appeals in the industrial and commercial side of the property taxes. And their taxes, they're taxed exact on their value. And so if their values are adjusted, their tax immediately goes down. And so that is his current projection, between -1% and 0% growth. And so we have assumed the 0% until we see November, December.
Understood. Thank you. I look forward to looking at that a little more granularly, as we're in a real estate market that home prices 15 to 20% increases, property that industrial land is on. I'm going to find it just personally difficult, and I know that this is not my forte, it's the tax assessors, but I will find it difficult that unless a company goes out of business, it can make much of a case that based upon a dip due to COVID, that its value and property value is that much less. I would have expected an increase, but we'll see. My understanding also, you mentioned different things we should project and be aware of. One thing I've never understood, and it is the way it is, and I'm not questioning it, but our largest bargaining unit at some point they're going to be negotiating this year while we're putting a budget together. If they have their way, they will probably more significantly impact our budget than perhaps at this point management would like, but it'll land somewhere, right? And none of that is built in. Do you have some amount that you factor in your projections just to guesstimate and accommodate? Because we know for a fact that's going to change the budget.
We have a policy and practice, I guess I would say, of only projecting in our formal forecasts anything that the board has approved. Since the Board of Commissioners has that full authority to change compensation, we don't assume something that hasn't been directed by the board. So what we do have in the budget is assuming the current employee population and merit increases that are occurring. And so you also do have, of course, as employees turn over, or just retire, those could be shifting some. So it's not like it's still a projection in the budget. We still have the ability to change the budget through supplementals, but you are right that we don't assume something that hasn't yet been approved by the board.
Even though we know something's going to happen, but that makes complete sense. And Chair, just another one or two, if I may, real quick, staccato like. There seems to be sort of a general sense that a higher bond rating is a good thing, and I understand that. But did we do any borrowing in the last 18 months?
We have not, no.
Okay. Are we doing any refinancing with the incredibly low interest rate environment we're in, or is that not needed because of what's already occurred?
There's only certain bonds can be refinanced. It's not quite as easy as, say, a mortgage to refinance. So there's times you're kind of locked in. They do that on purpose at the beginning. You can only call it, is what they refer to it as, at certain time periods. So we have already done that with all the bonds that are eligible.
So, thank you. I wish it was as easy. I did that on my place and saved a lot of money. There was one more, but I'm having a senior moment, so thank you for your time, Chair. Thank you very much, Ms. Moody. And I see Steve wanted to say something.
Well, I was just, if it's all right, Chair, I was just going to add that maybe Ms. Moody can elaborate on this, but we have done refinancing over the last several years during both this higher bond rating, lower interest rate environment. And so, and of course, we've had discussions about the potential of going out and issuing bonds. Those haven't advanced because of other things that haven't fallen into place. But both the ability to go out and finance at a lower interest rate with a higher bond rating, as well as the refinancing that we've done.
No, it's huge. And I remember my last question, Chair, if I might, my senior lapse, and that is, does this body, or is it just the Board of, I mean, once we get Treasury guidelines for the American Rescue Plan money, which is insane that we don't have yet, but we don't. Once we get those, is that something this body has jurisdiction over, or is that something that's entirely the realm of the Board of Commissioners?
Well, Chair, I'll take a stab at that, and Christine, you can maybe add to it. I think our feeling is that because those are really one-time resources, and what Treasury has told us so far, there are 4 or 5 categories of how you can spend that money, and it's largely focused on replacing lost revenue, paying for increased expenses from the pandemic, and then other one-time type expenses. We'll see if that language is further narrowed or defined in what Treasury comes out with in the next couple of weeks. But given that, our feeling is that those funds really are not part of this discussion related to, what we're doing now is discussing the ongoing operating budget of the county, right? The revenues that we're collecting and the ongoing services that we're going to fund. Those funds, and we receive funds throughout the course of the year from grants or other, we did through COVID and we amend the budget, and from FEMA and we amend the budget through that. And so while the amount of funds is certainly at a different scale, it's a similar type of structure. So we view that as sort of a one-time allocation of resources that the board will discuss priorities and principles about how to allocate those, likely in the latter portion of this budget process, if not after it's concluded.
Thank you, Stephen. Chair, thank you very much for the indulgence. I'm done.
Anybody new with questions for Ms. Moody? Okay. Seeing none, let's move forward with the break. I see 7:08 here. We're going to take a full 10 minutes. Let's reconvene, or let's take 12 minutes. Let's reconvene at 7:20 on the other channel for the public comment section. So we'll see you all on the other link at 7:20. Please join a couple minutes early. Thank you.
Is there some way to let anyone who's logged on to give public comment know about our delayed schedule?
Budget staff should be taking care of that.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you. of the Lane County Budget Committee. And is budget staff going to help us with the protocol for running the public comment, public hearing section of the meeting?
Yes, we will. Yes, Tanya Ellis will be helping you with that. She'll have a timer up here soon, and then she can call on the individuals who have signed up. Give us just a minute. Slight technical difficulties here. We're rusty after a year, I guess. There we go.
Okay, welcome to public comment for May 4th, Lane County Budget Committee, fiscal year 21-22. The meeting is now open for public comment. When your comment begins, your name will be called, you will be unmuted, and will be given 3 minutes for public comment. When your 3 minutes is up, you will go back into muted status, and the next name will be called. You can then continue to watch the webinar as long as you choose. The first person for public comment is Alex Ann Westlake. I will unmute you. And you will be given 3 minutes on the timer.
Hi, can you?
Public comment.
Hi, can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can, thank you.
Excellent. My name is Alex Ann Westlake, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a certified nurse midwife and the director of our community birth center. With the closure, of the Peace Health Nurse Midwifery Birth Center in 2019, which I know many of you are aware of, local parents were left with no community-based birth center option. This was tragic considering the 40+ year history of outstanding birth center services, plus the research that shows improved outcomes and lower costs with birth centers. To make matters even worse, next we were impacted by a global pandemic, and families were actively seeking community birth options to reduce the risk of COVID exposure, conserve hospital resources, and receive the extra support that parents need more than ever during these challenging times. However, that was not the end of it. This past fall, Lane County closed the prenatal clinic. This clinic was known for being the only place where anyone could go for care and they would never be fired or for not paying bills or for missing appointments. The Lane County Prenatal Clinic was also known for offering integrated Spanish language staff and services. And all that said, all those challenges that we've been through, 1 year ago, the Lane County Board of Commissioners Budget Committee approved a $10,000 grant for our community birth center to support our remodel work for opening a new birth center to serve Lane County. And I'm honored to come back today and report that we now have a building and the remodel work is scheduled to start in June. Our new building is located in Springfield, adjacent to Island Park. It is a beautiful, wonderful setting and just what we were looking for to serve our community. And when our community birth center opens, we'll provide essential healthcare with wraparound support for parents and babies to help them thrive on their journey through pregnancy, birth, and into parenthood. Our campaign has already raised over $210,000 toward our Get the Doors Open goal, as I call it, which is $300,000. And we're on schedule to open for services by the end of the year. Anyone who wants to learn more or support can visit our website, which is ourcommunitybirthcenter.org. We also have an event taking place this week on Thursday, where we will share a video tour of the new building. And we hope you can join us in celebrating this momentous time for the birth center and for the families we will soon serve.
Thank you for your public comment.
Thank you.
The next person for public comment is Danny Huff Smith. One moment, Danny, will I unmute you?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, my name's Danny Huff Smith. I live here in Eugene. I'm just concerned that year after year, we see Black Oregonians being jailed and imprisoned at much higher rates than others, including people from Lane County. But we don't see in our county budget any information about this problem. And we should be able to find out who is being stopped, what race they are, who's being arrested, charged, convicted, and sentenced in our county. I think the district attorney should take responsibility for making sure that we get this information by working with law enforcement as well as the county sheriff to put this information together in a report to the public regularly. So I'm just asking the commissioners to adopt a Lane County Budget Committee proposal for a new performance metric to require the Office of the District Attorney to collect and make publicly available race and ethnicity information proportional to the population on police encounters, citations, arrests, cases filed, and convictions on an annual basis. I yield my time.
Thank you for your public comment. Is Jeff Kern on the call? At this time, I do not see anyone else wanting to give public comment. So this does conclude our public comment. I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Blodman.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Also a note to the committee, I received, I believe, 3 email comments in addition. And so I consider those to be included into this public comment for my information. And we've got a little bit of time here. I wanted to ask, is there anybody else from the committee who has any additional business that they'd like to discuss real quick, or questions about procedure? Okay. Ms. Moody, any other information regarding the meeting for tomorrow?
Just that you have the agenda. So you see that we'll be focused on public safety tomorrow. So you will hear from the district attorney, the sheriff, parole and probation. And I will make one comment. You just mentioned the email public comment that you're receiving. So we do publish our email address so that, and it's on the agendas. We revise them. Today we realized it didn't have the email address on there for written public comment. So individuals can find those there. If they want to email public comment, we'll send it to all committee members. We will also put those documents out on our website under the day of the meeting. So if anyone's wanting to see those. So that's all I have for committee business as well.
And then just a reminder, tomorrow's meeting is 2 p.m. Is that correct?
Correct. 2 p.m. start.
Okay, excellent. Seeing no other questions or anything else, we'll see you all tomorrow at 2 p.m. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you.